The sound of Natalie Harper's stomach growling was louder than the wind that whipped through the dusty streets of Amarillo, Texas, on that scorching afternoon in August of 1882. She pressed a hand against her middle, trying to quiet the persistent ache of hunger that had become her constant companion over the past 3 weeks. Her worn brown dress hung looser on her frame than it had when she first arrived in this unforgiving town, and the sun beat down mercilessly on her bare head, having sold her bonnet 2 days prior for enough coins to buy a single loaf of bread. Natalie had come to Amarillo with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope that she might find work, any work, that would keep her from starving. The journey from Missouri had taken every ounce of strength she possessed, traveling in the back of wagons when kind souls offered passage, and walking when they did not. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but debts that the bank had been all too eager to collect. Her mother had passed years earlier from fever, and with no siblings and no other family willing to take in a 22-year-old woman with no prospects, Natalie had set out west with the slim hope that a fresh start might await her somewhere beyond the horizon. But Amarillo had proven as harsh as the landscape surrounding it. The few respectable positions available for women had already been filled. The general store did not need help. The hotel had no openings. The schoolhouse already had a teacher. Even the laundry services were managing without additional hands. Natalie had knocked on every door, asked at every establishment, and been turned away time and again. The small amount of money she had managed to scrape together before leaving Missouri had dwindled to nothing, spent on the journey and the first week of boarding at a modest rooming house. When she could no longer pay, the landlady had put her out with barely concealed satisfaction, as though Natalie's poverty might somehow be contagious. For the past 10 days, Natalie had been sleeping behind the feed store, curled up against the back wall where the overhang provided some shelter from the elements. She washed her face and hands at the public pump when no one was looking, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity even as everything else slipped away. The gnawing realization that she might not survive much longer had begun to creep into her thoughts during the long, sleepless nights. She had expected nothing when she came west, and so far, that was exactly what she had received. The main street of Amarillo was busy that afternoon, with ranch hands and townspeople going about their business. Natalie walked slowly past the storefronts, her eyes downcast to avoid the judgmental stares of the respectable women who clutched their reticules a little tighter when she passed. She knew how she must look, disheveled and desperate, and shame burned in her chest even as hunger twisted her stomach. She paused outside the restaurant, breathing in the aroma of fresh bread and roasted meat that drifted through the open door. The scent was torture, but she could not seem to make herself move away. Through the window, she could see families seated at tables, forks and knives clinking against plates laden with food. A little girl with ribbons in her hair was pushing peas around her plate, clearly uninterested in eating them, and Natalie felt a surge of frustration at the waste. That child had no idea how precious those peas were, how someone just outside would gladly eat them and be grateful. You planning on coming inside, or are you just going to stand there blocking the entrance? A sharp voice said behind her. Natalie turned to find a stern-faced woman in an expensive blue dress glaring at her. "I apologize," Natalie said quietly, stepping aside. "I was just passing by." "Then pass by somewhere else," the woman said coldly. "Loiterers are not welcome in this part of town." Natalie's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she nodded and moved away, her head held high despite the shame coursing through her. She would not cry. She had promised herself that much. No matter how bad things became, she would not break down in the street like a helpless child. She turned down a side street, heading toward the quieter part of town where she might sit for a while without being harassed. Her feet ached in her worn boots, the soles so thin now that she could feel every stone and rut in the road. As she walked, she noticed a small crowd gathered outside the telegraph office. Curious despite her misery, she moved closer to hear what the commotion was about. "Stage was robbed just outside of town," a man was saying, his voice excited with the drama of it all. "Third one this month. They are saying it is the Dalton gang, but nobody knows for certain. Sheriff ought to do something about it," another man replied. "Cannot have folks afraid to travel the roads." Natalie listened for another moment, then continued on her way. Robberies and outlaws were a concern for people who had something to lose. She had nothing, and therefore nothing to fear from bandits. The thought was oddly liberating in its bleakness. She found a shaded spot beside an old abandoned building and sank down onto the ground, leaning back against the weathered wood. The shade provided relief from the brutal sun, and for a moment she simply closed her eyes and tried to think of nothing at all. But her mind would not quiet. It kept circling back to the same terrible question. What was she going to do? She could not continue like this much longer. The hunger was weakening her, making her lightheaded and clumsy. Soon she would be too weak to even look for work, assuming any work materialized. She had already considered and rejected the idea of stealing food. Her parents had raised her to be honest, and even facing starvation, she could not bring herself to violate that core principle. But what other options remained? The sound of horse hooves on the packed dirt road made her open her eyes. A rider was approaching, sitting tall in the saddle atop a beautiful chestnut mare. Even in her depleted state, Natalie could appreciate the fine quality of both horse and rider. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a well-made tan shirt and dark trousers tucked into polished boots. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the easy confidence with which he sat his horse. He rode past without noticing her, and she watched him go, wondering idly what it must be like to move through the world with such assurance. To have a fine horse and good clothes and presumably a full stomach. She did not begrudge him his fortune, but she could not help the small ache of envy that tightened in her chest. The afternoon wore on, and eventually Natalie forced herself to stand and start moving again. Sitting still made the hunger worse somehow, made her too aware of her body's complaints. She walked through the back streets of Amarillo, her steps aimless and slow. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, she made her way back toward the feed store, preparing for another uncomfortable night on the hard ground. But as she rounded the corner into the alley behind the store, she stopped short. There were two men there, rough-looking characters who were examining the back door of the feed store with clear criminal intent. They looked up as she appeared, and their expressions shifted from surprise to calculation. "Well now," one of them said, stepping toward her. He was a large man with a thick beard and small, mean eyes. "What do we have here?" Natalie took a step backward, her heart suddenly pounding. "I am sorry. I did not mean to intrude. I will go." "Not so fast," the other man said. He was leaner than his companion, with a scar running down one cheek. "You have seen us here. Cannot have you running off to tell the sheriff now, can we?" "I will not say anything," Natalie said quickly, taking another step back. "I promise, I will just go and forget I saw anything." The bearded man laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "Sure you will, and we should just trust you on that." Fear flooded through Natalie, sharp and cold. She turned to run, but the lean man was faster. He caught her arm in a grip that made her gasp with pain, yanking her back. She struggled against him, but he was far stronger, and her weakened state made her efforts pathetic. "Let me go," she cried out, hoping someone might come to help. The bearded man moved closer, his expression ugly. "Shut her up, will you? Last thing we need is her caterwauling bringing folks running." The lean man's hand clamped over her mouth, and Natalie bit down hard. He yelped and jerked his hand away, and she screamed as loud as she could manage before his fist connected with the side of her head. The world spun, pain exploding through her skull, and she would have fallen if he had not been holding her up. "I said shut up," he snarled, raising his fist again. "Let her go." The voice was calm and steady, but it carried an unmistakable authority that made both men freeze. Natalie's vision was blurry from the blow, but she could make out the shape of a man standing at the mouth of the alley. The same rider she had seen earlier, she realized. He had dismounted and was walking toward them with measured steps. "This does not concern you, friend," the bearded man said, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "Best move along." "I am not your friend," the stranger said, still in that same calm tone, "and I will not tell you again." "Let the lady go." "Lady," the lean man laughed. "This is just some vagrant girl, probably a thief herself." "I can see what she is," the stranger said, "and I can see what you are too. Now step away from her." The bearded man drew his gun, and Natalie's breath caught in her throat. But the stranger was faster than seemed possible. His own pistol was in his hand before the bearded man had fully cleared leather. The barrel pointed steadily at the man's chest. "Drop it," the stranger said, and there was steel beneath the calm now. The bearded man hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon and let it fall to the ground. The lean man released Natalie, shoving her away roughly. She stumbled and nearly fell, catching herself against the wall. "Both of you get out of here," the stranger said. "And if I see you in Amarillo again, I will not be so generous." The two men did not need to be told twice. They hurried past the stranger and disappeared down the street, nearly running in their haste to get away. The stranger watched them go, his gun still drawn, until they were out of sight. Only then did he holster the weapon and turn his attention to Natalie. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Natalie was trembling, the shock and fear catching up with her all at once. She raised a shaking hand to the side of her head where the man had struck her, and her fingers came away with a small amount of blood. The stranger moved closer, and for the first time, she got a clear look at his face. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly under the brim of his hat and warm brown eyes that held genuine concern. His features were handsome in a rugged way, with strong bones and sun-browned skin that spoke of long hours outdoors. "Let me see," he said, reaching toward her head. Natalie flinched back instinctively, and he immediately stopped, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I am not going to hurt you," he said quietly, "but that cut should be looked at. When did you last have it cleaned?" "Just now," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He just hit me." The stranger's jaw tightened, anger flashing briefly in his eyes before he controlled it. "Come with me," he said. "The doctor's office is just down the street. He can tend to that properly." "I cannot afford a doctor," Natalie said, shame flooding through her again. "Thank you for your help, but I will be fine." "I am paying," the stranger said simply. "And it is not a request, miss." "That cut needs attention." Natalie wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to what little pride she had left, but the pain in her head was getting worse, and she felt dizzy and sick. She nodded reluctantly. The stranger offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it, grateful for the support. He guided her out of the alley and down the main street, moving slowly to accommodate her unsteady gait. People turned to look as they passed, and Natalie could feel their curious stares burning into her back. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on simply putting one foot in front of the other. The doctor's office was a small building near the center of town. The stranger opened the door and ushered her inside, where a middle-aged man in spectacles looked up from a desk covered in papers. "Afternoon, Doc," the stranger said. "This lady needs some attention. She was struck in the head." The doctor stood immediately, concern crossing his features. "Bring her over here," he said, gesturing to an examination table. "Let us have a look." The stranger helped Natalie to the table and stepped back while the doctor examined her head. His fingers were gentle as he probed the injury, and he made small humming sounds as he worked. "Not too deep," he announced after a moment, "but head wounds do bleed considerably. I will clean it and bandage it and you should be fine. Might have a headache for a day or two." He paused, studying her more closely. "When did you last eat, young lady?" Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Yesterday," she lied. The doctor exchanged a look with the stranger that suggested he did not believe her. "I see. Well, you should have something soon. Cannot heal properly on an empty stomach." He set about cleaning the wound, and Natalie gritted her teeth against the sting of whatever antiseptic he was using. The stranger remained in the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching the proceedings with an expression she could not quite read. When the doctor had finished bandaging her head, he stepped back. "There you are. Keep it clean and dry and change the bandage daily. Come back in 3 days so I can check on it." "Thank you, doctor," Natalie said quietly. "Thank Wade here," the doctor said, nodding toward the stranger. "He is the one paying the bill, Wade. So that was his name." Natalie turned to look at him properly for the first time. "Thank you," she said. "I am very grateful for your help. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along." Wade pushed off from the wall and moved closer. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." But Natalie knew that was not true. Plenty of people had walked past her in the streets of Amarillo over the past weeks, had seen her sleeping rough and looking hungry, and not one of them had lifted a finger to help. This man, this Wade, was different. "What is your name?" Wade asked. "Natalie Harper," she replied. "Well, Miss Harper, the doctor is right about one thing. You need to eat. Would you do me the honor of joining me for supper?" Natalie's stomach twisted with longing at the mere mention of food, but she shook her head. "I cannot accept. You have already done too much." "Nonsense," Wade said. "I am hungry and I would appreciate the company, unless you have other plans." The gentle humor in his voice told her he knew full well she had no plans, and Natalie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She was so tired of being proud, so tired of pretending she did not need help. And the truth was, she desperately needed help. She needed food and shelter and a dozen other things she had been doing without. "I would be grateful," she said softly, the words barely making it past the lump in her throat. Wade smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less serious. "Good. Come on, then. The restaurant down the street has the best steaks in Amarillo." He offered his arm again, and this time Natalie took it without hesitation. They left the doctor's office and walked back toward the main street. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had cooled slightly from the brutal heat of the afternoon. Natalie felt almost dreamlike as they walked, as though she might wake up at any moment and find herself still huddled behind the feed store, alone and hungry. The restaurant was the same one Natalie had stood outside earlier, pressing her nose against the window like a starving dog. Now she was walking through the front door on the arm of a handsome stranger, and the contrast was so absurd she almost laughed. The hostess greeted Wade with a warm smile that suggested he was a regular customer, and showed them to a table near the window. Wade pulled out a chair for Natalie, and she sat, feeling awkward and out of place in her worn, dirty dress. The other diners were all well-dressed, respectable people, and she was acutely aware of how she must look among them. But Wade seemed unconcerned as he took his own seat across from her and picked up the menu. "Order whatever you like," he said. "I recommend the steak, but the chicken is excellent too." A waiter appeared, and Wade ordered steaks for both of them, along with potatoes, vegetables, bread, and coffee. When the waiter had gone, Wade leaned back in his chair and regarded Natalie with those warm, brown eyes. "So tell me, Miss Harper, how did you end up in Amarillo?" Natalie hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but something about Wade's open, honest face made her want to tell the truth. "I came looking for work," she said. "My father died 6 months ago. He left debts and I had nowhere else to go. I thought perhaps I might find something out west." "And did you?" Wade asked gently. "No," Natalie admitted. "There does not seem to be much call for someone with my skills, or lack thereof. What can you do?" "I can read and write, do arithmetic, I can cook and clean and sew. I helped my father with his bookkeeping before he died." She smiled bitterly. "All very useful skills, I am sure, but apparently not enough to secure employment in this town." Wade was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "How long have you been here?" "3 weeks." "And where are you staying?" Natalie looked down at her hands, shame washing over her again. "Nowhere at the moment. I was at a boarding house initially, but I ran out of money." The waiter returned with coffee, providing a welcome interruption. Natalie wrapped her hands around the warm cup, breathing in the rich aroma. It had been so long since she had tasted coffee that she had almost forgotten how good it smelled. "So you have been sleeping rough," Wade said quietly, and it was not a question. Natalie nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "Behind the feed store. Until tonight, anyway. I suppose I will need to find somewhere else now, since those men know I have been using that spot." "You are not going back there," Wade said firmly. Natalie looked up, startled by the conviction in his voice. "Where else can I go? I have no money for lodging." "You can stay at my ranch," Wade said. Natalie stared at him, certain she must have misheard. "I beg your pardon, my ranch. It is about 5 miles outside of town. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who lives in the main house. She has been after me to hire some help for months now. The place is too big for one person to manage alone. You said you can cook and clean." "Yes, but I cannot possibly impose like that." "It is not an imposition if I am offering you employment," Wade said. "Room and board plus wages. You would have your own room, meals provided, and actual work to do. Mrs. Chen will appreciate the help, and I will appreciate not hearing her complain about how much work there is." The food arrived before Natalie could formulate a response. The waiter set down plates loaded with thick steaks, fluffy potatoes swimming in butter, fresh green beans, and warm bread. The sight and smell of it all made Natalie's eyes water. She picked up her fork with a trembling hand, then paused. "Are you certain?" she asked, needing to hear him say it again. Wade had already started cutting into his steak. He looked up and met her eyes, his expression sincere. "Miss Harper, I would not offer if I was not certain. I need the help and you need the work. It seems like a fair arrangement to me." Natalie felt a tear slide down her cheek and she quickly wiped it away. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." "You are welcome," Wade said simply. "Now please eat before it gets cold." Natalie did not need to be told twice. She cut into the steak and took a bite. And the taste of it, the rich, savory flavor combined with the perfect tenderness of the meat, was almost overwhelming. She had to force herself to eat slowly, to chew properly and not simply shovel the food into her mouth like a starving animal. But it was difficult. Her body was screaming at her to eat faster, to consume everything in sight. Wade ate at a leisurely pace, occasionally making small talk about the ranch and the area. Natalie learned that his full name was Wade Lawson, that he had inherited the ranch from his uncle 2 years ago, and that he primarily raised cattle with some horses as well. He had been in town that afternoon to meet with the bank about a loan to expand his herd. "Business is good," he explained. "The demand for beef is growing, especially with the railroad expansion. But I need more stock to meet that demand, which requires capital I do not currently have." "And the bank agreed to the loan?" Natalie asked. Wade nodded. "Eventually. Took some convincing, but yes. They approved it this afternoon, which is why I was in town celebrating with a good meal," he smiled. "Though I have to say, the company makes it even better." Natalie felt a flutter in her chest at the compliment and quickly took a sip of coffee to hide her reaction. She was not used to such attention from men, especially not handsome ones like Wade Lawson. Her father had kept her fairly sheltered, and the few young men who had shown interest back in Missouri had been promptly discouraged. Not that it mattered now, with her father gone and her old life behind her. They finished their meal, and Wade ordered coffee cake for dessert, which Natalie ate with slightly more restraint than the main course. By the time they were done, full dark had fallen outside, and the restaurant was beginning to empty as other diners finished their meals and headed home. Wade settled the bill and stood, offering his hand to help Natalie up. She felt stronger now with food in her belly, though the day's events were beginning to catch up with her. Her head ached where she had been struck, and exhaustion was pulling at her limbs. "My horse is at the stable," Wade said. "We will collect her and ride out to the ranch. It is not far." They walked through the quiet streets to the livery stable, where a young man brought out Wade's chestnut mare. She was even more beautiful up close, with intelligent eyes and a glossy coat that spoke of excellent care. "This is Rosie," Wade said, patting the mare's neck affectionately. "Best horse I have ever owned." He mounted with easy grace, then extended his hand down to Natalie. "Can you ride?" "A little," Natalie said, though in truth, she had only been on a horse a handful of times in her life. Wade pulled her up behind him, and Natalie had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling off. She could feel the solid muscle of his back through his shirt, and the warmth of his body was comforting in the cooling night air. They rode out of Amarillo at a gentle pace, following a well-worn road that led north. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see by, and the stars overhead were brilliant in the clear Texas sky. Natalie rested her cheek against Wade's back, feeling the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them and the steady beat of Wade's heart. She still could not quite believe this was happening. Just hours ago, she had been at her lowest point, hungry and afraid and alone. And now she was riding through the night toward a new job and a new home, rescued by a man who seemed too good to be true. Part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Wade to reveal some ulterior motive or hidden cost to his generosity. But another part of her, the part that had been beaten down by weeks of hardship and disappointment, was simply too tired to question good fortune. She would accept this gift, this unexpected kindness, and deal with whatever consequences might come. The ranch appeared in the distance, a sprawling collection of buildings silhouetted against the starlit sky. As they drew closer, Natalie could make out a large main house, a barn, several outbuildings, and a network of corrals and fences. Even in the darkness, she could tell it was a well-maintained property. Wade rode up to the main house and dismounted, then helped Natalie down. Her legs were unsteady after the ride, and he kept a steadying hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Wait here," he said. I will put Rosie away and then show you inside." He led the mare toward the barn, leaving Natalie standing in front of the house. It was a handsome structure, 2 stories tall with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Rocking chairs sat on either side of the door, and flower boxes hung beneath the windows, though it was too dark to see what was planted in them. Wade returned a few minutes later and guided her up the porch steps. He opened the front door and ushered her inside, lighting a lamp that sat on a table in the entryway. Warm light spilled through the space, revealing a comfortable, well-furnished interior. There was a parlor to the right with upholstered furniture and a fireplace, and what looked like a dining room to the left. Straight ahead, a staircase led to the second floor. "Mrs. Chen will have retired for the night already," Wade said, keeping his voice low. "I will show you to your room, and you can meet her properly in the morning." He led Natalie up the stairs to the second floor, down a hallway to a door near the end. Opening it, he revealed a small but pleasant bedroom with a single bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the front of the property. "This should suit you," Wade said. "There is water in the pitcher and clean linens in the dresser. The privy is out back, but there is a chamber pot under the bed for nighttime use. Breakfast is usually around 6, but sleep as late as you need tomorrow. You have had a difficult day." Natalie looked around the room, her throat tight with emotion. It was simple and modest, but to her, it looked like a palace. A real bed with clean sheets, a roof over her head, safety and shelter, and the promise of regular meals. "Thank you," she managed to say, though the words felt wholly inadequate for what she was feeling. Wade smiled at her from the doorway. "Get some rest, Miss Harper. Things will look better in the morning." He closed the door gently behind him, and Natalie was alone. She stood in the center of the room for a long moment, just breathing and trying to process everything that had happened. Then, moving slowly, she poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, being careful around the bandage on her head. The water turned gray with the accumulated dirt of weeks on the street, and she had to change it twice before she felt truly clean. She wanted nothing more than to collapse into that soft-looking bed, but she forced herself to remove her dress first, hanging it over the back of the chair. She would need to wash it properly tomorrow, along with her undergarments. For now, she slipped between the sheets in just her chemise, and the feeling of clean cotton against her skin was almost as overwhelming as the food had been. She lay back against the pillow and closed her eyes, certain that sleep would claim her immediately. But instead, her mind raced, replaying the events of the day. The confrontation in the alley, Wade's timely intervention, the meal, the ride, this room, and Wade himself with his kind eyes and gentle manner and seemingly limitless generosity. Who was this man who would rescue a complete stranger, pay her medical bills, buy her dinner, and offer her employment, all without asking for anything in return? In Natalie's limited experience, people did not act like that without some hidden agenda. And yet, Wade had been nothing but courteous and respectful. He had not made any inappropriate advances or suggestions. He had simply helped her because she needed help. The thought made her chest ache with something she could not quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but also a kind of wonder. After expecting nothing, she had received everything: food, shelter, safety, and work. All because one man had chosen to intervene when others would have walked by. Natalie finally drifted off to sleep with that thought in her mind, and for the first time in weeks, she slept deeply and without fear. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds singing outside. For a disoriented moment, she could not remember where she was. Then memory returned, and she sat up quickly, looking around the room. It had not been a dream. She was really here, in Wade Lawson's ranch house, with a bed and a roof and the promise of employment. The sunlight suggested it was well past dawn, probably mid-morning at least. Natalie scrambled out of bed, mortified that she had overslept. Wade had said she could sleep late, but she had not meant to take such advantage of his kindness. She dressed quickly in her wrinkled, dirty dress, wishing desperately that she had something cleaner to wear. Then she made the bed, smoothing the quilt carefully, and ventured out into the hallway. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and something baking. She found the kitchen at the back of the house, a large, sunny room with a cast-iron stove, a long work table, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking implements. A woman stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She was small and slender, with black hair streaked with gray pulled back in a bun and warm, intelligent eyes. She looked up as Natalie appeared in the doorway and smiled. "Good morning," she said. "You must be Natalie. I am Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper. Mr. Wade told me all about you when he came down for breakfast." Natalie felt herself blush. "I apologize for sleeping so late. I did not mean to be lazy." Mrs. Chen waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense. Mr. Wade said you were to rest as long as you needed. And from what he told me, you have earned a good rest." She gestured to the table. "Sit down and have some breakfast. There is fresh coffee and I just pulled biscuits out of the oven." Natalie sat at the table, and Mrs. Chen set down a plate with fluffy biscuits, butter, jam, and scrambled eggs. She poured a cup of coffee and placed it beside the plate, then sat down across from Natalie with her own cup. "Mr. Wade tells me you will be helping me around the house," Mrs. Chen said. "I cannot tell you how happy I am to hear it. This place is far too much for one person to manage properly. I have been after him to hire help for months." "I will do my very best," Natalie promised. "I am very grateful for the opportunity." "We are grateful to have you," Mrs. Chen said warmly. "It will be nice to have another woman around. Gets lonely sometimes with just me and Mr. Wade and the ranch hands. Speaking of which, you will meet the hands at lunch. They take their midday meal in the bunkhouse usually, but Mr. Wade likes to have a big Sunday dinner with everyone, and that is tomorrow." As Natalie ate, Mrs. Chen explained the general routine of the household. Wade rose early and was usually out working with the cattle or horses by dawn. He came in for lunch around noon, and dinner was typically served at 6 in the evening. Mrs. Chen handled the cooking and general housekeeping, but there was always more work than she could manage alone. Laundry, cleaning, mending, preserving food, tending the kitchen garden, and a dozen other tasks that kept the household running smoothly. "I will show you around properly after you have finished eating," Mrs. Chen said. "And we will need to get you some proper clothes. That dress has seen better days, if you do not mind me saying." Natalie looked down at her worn brown dress and felt shame creep up her neck. "It is all I have, I am afraid, but I will make do. I can mend it." "I have some dresses that might fit you," Mrs. Chen said. "I was a bit heavier a few years back and I kept the old clothes for scrap fabric, but I think they would suit you well enough. We can alter them if needed." "I could not take your clothes," Natalie protested. "You are not taking them, I am giving them to you." Mrs. Chen's tone was firm but kind. "Besides, what use are they to me sitting in a trunk? They might as well go to someone who needs them." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes for what felt like the 100th time in the past day. "Everyone here is so kind," she said softly. "I am not used to such generosity." Mrs. Chen reached across the table and patted her hand. "You have had a hard time of it, I think, but you are safe here. Mr. Wade is a good man, one of the best I have known. He will treat you fairly and with respect. You have nothing to fear in this house." After breakfast, Mrs. Chen gave Natalie a tour of the house. Besides the parlor, dining room, and kitchen on the first floor, there was a study where Wade kept his business records and a small room off the kitchen that served as Mrs. Chen's bedroom. Upstairs, in addition to Natalie's room, there were 3 other bedrooms. The largest belonged to Wade, and the other 2 were guest rooms that were rarely used. Mrs. Chen then brought Natalie to her room and produced a trunk from the closet. Inside were several dresses in various colors and styles, all well made and in good condition. She selected a simple blue calico dress and held it up against Natalie. "This should fit reasonably well," she said. "Try it on and we will see what needs adjusting." The dress fit better than Natalie's old brown one, though it was a bit loose in the waist. Mrs. Chen pinned it expertly and promised to take it in that evening. She also provided fresh undergarments, an apron, and a bonnet for outdoor work. "There now," Mrs. Chen said, looking Natalie over with satisfaction. "You look much better already. A proper bath tonight and you will feel like a new person." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Chen showed Natalie the kitchen garden, the chicken coop, the root cellar, and the various outbuildings. She explained where supplies were kept, how Wade liked his meals prepared, and the general schedule of household tasks. Natalie absorbed it all eagerly, grateful to have something productive to focus on. She helped Mrs. Chen prepare lunch, which Wade came in to eat promptly at noon. He appeared dusty and tired from the morning's work, but his face lit up when he saw Natalie in the kitchen. "Miss Harper," he said, removing his hat. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Natalie replied. "And please call me Natalie. After all your kindness, formality seems unnecessary." Wade smiled. "Only if you call me Wade. Miss Harper and Mr. Lawson are too stuffy for a ranch house." They sat down to lunch together, the 3 of them around the kitchen table. It was simple fare, just soup and bread, but it was delicious and filling. Wade talked about the morning's work, mentioning a fence that needed mending and a cow that was showing signs of calving soon. Mrs. Chen discussed plans for the week's meals and asked Wade to bring back certain supplies the next time he went to town. Natalie mostly listened, content to observe the easy rapport between Wade and his housekeeper. It was clear they had been working together for some time and had developed a comfortable relationship built on mutual respect. Mrs. Chen was not afraid to speak her mind to Wade, and he valued her opinions and listened when she made suggestions. After lunch, Wade returned to his work, and Natalie spent the afternoon helping Mrs. Chen with various tasks. She washed dishes, swept floors, collected eggs from the chicken coop, and helped prepare the evening meal. The work was not difficult, but it was steady, and Natalie found a kind of peace in the routine of it. For the first time in weeks, she felt useful. She was contributing, earning her keep, rather than simply existing as a burden or a charity case. That evening, after dinner had been cleared away, Mrs. Chen heated water for a bath. She set up a large tub in the kitchen and brought in bucket after bucket of hot water until it was full enough for bathing. "Take your time," she told Natalie. "Wade is out checking on the stock, and I have mending to do in my room. You will have privacy." Natalie sank into the hot water with a sigh of pure bliss. It had been weeks since she had been truly clean, and the feeling of washing away all that accumulated dirt and sweat and fear was almost spiritual. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, washed her hair twice, and soaked until the water began to cool. When she finally emerged and dried herself with the towel Mrs. Chen had left, she felt reborn. She dressed in a clean nightgown that Mrs. Chen had provided and combed out her wet hair, sitting by the kitchen fire to let it dry. The day's events played through her mind, and she marveled again at the drastic change in her circumstances. Yesterday at this time, she had been huddled behind the feed store, hungry and afraid. Tonight she was clean, fed, safe, and employed. It seemed impossible, and yet here she was. Wade returned as she was finishing with her hair. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, looking surprised to see her there. "I apologize," he said. "I did not mean to intrude. I was just getting some water." "You are not intruding," Natalie said. "This is your house." He moved to the pump and filled a glass, drinking it down in long swallows. When he turned back to her, his expression was thoughtful. "How was your first day?" he asked. "Wonderful," Natalie said honestly. "Mrs. Chen has been very patient in showing me everything. I hope I can live up to her expectations." "I am sure you will do fine," Wade said. He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to thank you for agreeing to stay and help. I know you had reservations about accepting the position." "I had reservations about accepting charity," Natalie corrected gently. "But this is not charity. This is honest work for honest wages. That is something I can accept with a clear conscience." Wade nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "I am glad you see it that way. Mrs. Chen was right when she said we needed help. You are doing us a favor as much as we are helping you." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, and Natalie was aware of how different this felt from any previous interaction she had had with a man. There was no awkwardness, no sense of impropriety. Just two people talking, easy and natural. "I should let you get to bed," Wade said finally. "Morning comes early on a ranch." "Good night, Wade," Natalie said. "Good night, Natalie." She made her way upstairs to her room, her damp hair leaving a trail of water drops on the floor. She brushed it out once more, then climbed into bed, marveling again at the luxury of clean sheets and a soft mattress. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Wade's smile and the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. The next several weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Natalie rose early each morning and worked alongside Mrs. Chen, learning the rhythms of the household and becoming more confident in her abilities. She discovered that she was actually quite good at cooking, better even than Mrs. Chen in some respects, and the older woman was generous in her praise. Natalie also took over most of the mending and laundry, tasks that Mrs. Chen found tedious, but that Natalie found oddly soothing. She saw Wade at meals, and occasionally in passing during the day when he came in for water or to speak with Mrs. Chen about household matters. He was unfailingly polite and friendly, but he kept a certain distance that Natalie appreciated. She was still finding her footing in this new life and was not ready for any kind of complication. The ranch hands were a diverse group of men ranging in age from young boys barely old enough to shave to grizzled veterans who had been working cattle for decades. They were respectful to Natalie, tipping their hats when they saw her and offering quiet thanks when she helped serve meals. Mrs. Chen had warned her that some ranch hands could be rough and inappropriate with women, but Wade's crew seemed to be of better quality than that. On Sundays, as Mrs. Chen had mentioned, everyone gathered at the main house for a large midday meal. Natalie and Mrs. Chen would spend most of Saturday preparing food for the occasion, roasting meat and baking pies and cooking huge quantities of vegetables and bread. The men would crowd into the dining room and the parlor, sitting wherever they could find space, and the house would fill with laughter and conversation. Natalie enjoyed these gatherings. They reminded her of happier times before her father's death, when their house had been full of warmth and life. Wade presided over the meals with easy authority, making sure everyone had enough to eat and listening to the men's concerns and suggestions about the ranch operation. It was clear that he was well respected by his employees, and Natalie could see why. He worked as hard as any of them, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself, and he treated them with fairness and dignity. She found herself watching Wade more than she should during those Sunday dinners. The way he laughed at someone's joke, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The way he listened intently when someone spoke, giving them his full attention. The casual strength evident in the way he moved, in the breadth of his shoulders and the capability of his hands. She told herself it was simple appreciation for a good employer, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. One evening about a month after Natalie had arrived at the ranch, Wade knocked on the kitchen door as she was cleaning up after dinner. Mrs. Chen had already retired to her room and Natalie was alone. "Come in," she called, thinking it must be Mrs. Chen returning for something, but it was Wade who entered, hat in hand, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said. "Not at all. I am just finishing the dishes. Can I get you something? Coffee? There is pie left from dinner." "No, thank you. I actually wanted to speak with you about something." Natalie dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him fully, a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? Was he dissatisfied with her work? Wade seemed to sense her concern because he quickly added, "It is nothing bad. I have just been thinking about your situation, and I wanted to make sure you were being treated fairly." "Mrs. Chen has been wonderful," Natalie said. "I could not ask for a better teacher or companion." "I am glad to hear that, but I was actually referring to your wages. We never discussed specifics, and I want to make sure you are receiving fair compensation for your work." Natalie had not really thought much about the wages. She was so grateful for the room and board that the idea of actual money seemed almost secondary. "Whatever you think is fair," she said. Wade frowned slightly. "That is not really an answer. You should know your worth and make sure you are being paid accordingly." He named a figure that made Natalie's eyes widen. It was more than she had expected, more than she would have dared ask for. "That is very generous," she said. "It is the going rate for household help in this area," Wade replied. "You are doing the work of a full-time employee and you should be compensated as such. I will pay you monthly at the end of each month. The first payment will be in 2 weeks." "Thank you," Natalie said. "I truly appreciate it." Wade nodded, but he did not leave. He seemed to be working up to saying something else, and Natalie waited, curious. "There is something else I wanted to mention," he said finally. "I have to go into Amarillo tomorrow to meet with some cattle buyers. I thought you might like to come along, do some shopping, see the town under better circumstances than your last visit." Natalie's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of returning to Amarillo, where she had spent those terrible weeks sleeping rough and going hungry, filled her with dread. But then she considered that she did need some things. Fabric to make new clothes, perhaps some personal items, things she could now afford with the wages Wade would be paying her. "I would like that," she said. "Thank you for offering." Wade's face brightened. "Good. We will leave after breakfast, around 8. The business should not take more than a few hours, so you will have plenty of time to shop." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Natalie dressed in one of the altered dresses Mrs. Chen had given her, a pretty green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She braided her hair and pinned it up neatly, then added a bonnet to protect her face from the sun. Wade was waiting by the wagon when she came outside. He had hitched up a sturdy pair of horses and loaded some supplies that needed to go to town. He smiled when he saw her and offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. The ride to Amarillo took about an hour, and they talked easily during the journey. Wade asked about her life before coming to Texas, and Natalie found herself telling him about her father, about their small house in Missouri, about the quiet, modest life they had led. She spoke about her mother, too, who had died when Natalie was 14, and how much she still missed her. Wade, in turn, told her about growing up on his family's farm in Kansas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 20, and about his uncle bringing him to Texas to help run the ranch. His uncle had died 2 years ago, leaving everything to Wade, and he had been working hard since then to build up the operation and make it profitable. "It is a lot of responsibility," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I am doing it right, if my uncle would be proud of what I have done with the place." "I think he would be," Natalie said. "From what I have seen, you run the ranch well. The hands respect you, the stock is healthy, the property is well maintained." "Those are not small achievements." Wade glanced at her, and there was something warm and grateful in his expression. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might think." They arrived in Amarillo just before 10 and made their way to the main street. Wade had business at the bank and the telegraph office, so he arranged to meet Natalie at the general store in 2 hours. He pressed some money into her hand before leaving, insisting that she use it to buy whatever she needed. Natalie watched him walk away, then turned to face the town that had been so unwelcoming just weeks ago. It looked different now, less menacing somehow, or perhaps she was the one who was different. She was no longer a desperate, hungry vagrant. She was a respectably employed woman with money in her pocket and a clean dress on her back. The transformation was remarkable. She made her way to the general store and spent a pleasant hour browsing the goods. She bought fabric for new dresses, thread, needles, and pins. She purchased a new pair of boots to replace her worn-out ones, and some ribbon just because it was pretty. The storekeeper, who had looked at her with suspicion during her previous visits to town, now treated her with polite respect, and the change was both satisfying and a little sad. When she had finished her shopping, she still had time before meeting Wade, so she walked through the town, reacquainting herself with its layout. She passed the restaurant where Wade had bought her that first meal and felt a rush of gratitude and affection for the man who had so thoroughly changed her life. She was standing outside the hotel, admiring the flower boxes in the windows, when a voice behind her made her freeze. "Well, well. Look who cleaned up nice." Natalie turned to find the lean man from the alley, the one who had struck her, standing a few feet away. He was alone this time, and he looked just as mean as she remembered. "I have nothing to say to you," Natalie said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear rising in her throat. "That is fine. I got something to say to you, though." He stepped closer, and Natalie fought the urge to back away. "You cost me and my partner a good score that night. The feed store was going to be an easy job, but then you showed up and brought that cowboy down on us. We had to leave town for a few weeks, lay low, cost us time and money." "I am sorry for your inconvenience," Natalie said coldly. "Perhaps you should consider honest work instead of robbery." The man's face darkened with anger. "You got a smart mouth on you now that you are not starving in an alley. But you know what? I remember how scared you looked that night, how weak and helpless you were. I bet you are not as tough as you are acting." Before Natalie could respond, a hand came down on the man's shoulder, spinning him around. Wade stood there, his face hard with anger. "You have exactly 5 seconds to walk away," Wade said, his voice dangerously quiet, "or I am going to finish what I started in that alley." The lean man looked from Wade to Natalie and back again. Whatever he saw in Wade's face made him reconsider his course of action. "This does not concern you," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Anything involving Natalie concerns me," Wade said. "Now get out of my sight before I call the sheriff." The man hesitated for another moment, then spat on the ground and walked away, disappearing into the crowd on the street. Wade watched him go, then turned to Natalie, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I am fine," Natalie said, though her hands were shaking. "He was just trying to intimidate me." "Come on," Wade said, taking her elbow gently. "Let us get your packages and head back to the ranch. I am done with my business anyway." They collected Natalie's purchases from the general store and loaded them into the wagon. As they rode out of town, Natalie could feel the tension gradually leaving her body. She felt safe with Wade, safer than she had felt in a long time. It was more than just his physical strength or his skill with a gun. It was the core of decency in him, the fundamental goodness that seemed to guide his every action. "Thank you," she said as they left Amarillo behind, "for coming when you did. I do not know what he would have done if you had not been there." "I am just glad I saw you talking to him," Wade said. "When I recognized him from that night, I knew he was up to no good." He paused, then added, "Natalie, I want you to know that you are under my protection as long as you work for me. If anyone bothers you or threatens you, I will deal with them. You do not have to be afraid." "I am not afraid," Natalie said. "Not when I am with you." The words hung in the air between them, more revealing than Natalie had intended. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and quickly looked away, focusing on the landscape passing by. Wade did not respond immediately, but when Natalie finally dared to glance at him, she saw that he was smiling. The weeks continued to pass, and summer gave way to fall. The heat that had been so oppressive when Natalie first arrived began to ease, replaced by cooler mornings and evenings. The work on the ranch shifted with the seasons. There was a big cattle drive in late September, and Wade was gone for nearly 2 weeks, driving a portion of his herd to market. Mrs. Chen and Natalie managed the household in his absence, and Natalie was surprised by how much she missed seeing Wade at meals, missed their occasional conversations when he came in from the fields. When he returned, trail-worn and exhausted but triumphant with a good profit from the sale, Natalie felt her heart lift in a way that had nothing to do with simple relief at an employer's return. She was falling for Wade Lawson, she realized, falling hard and fast and completely. It was not something she had planned or even wanted, given the complications it might cause. But the heart did not ask permission, and Natalie found herself thinking of Wade constantly. The way he smiled when he was pleased, the kindness with which he treated everyone around him, the quiet strength and competence he brought to everything he did. She thought about his hands, weathered and strong from hard work, and wondered what they might feel like touching her face. She did her best to hide her growing feelings, but Mrs. Chen was perceptive. One evening as they were preparing dinner, the older woman gave Natalie a knowing look. "You have feelings for him," she said. It was not a question. Natalie felt her face flush. "I do not know what you mean." "Of course you do. I have eyes, child. I see the way you look at him." "And I see the way he looks at you too." Natalie's heart skipped. "He looks at me," Mrs. Chen smiled, "as though you hung the moon and stars. He has for weeks now. I have been wondering when you two would figure it out." "Nothing can come of it," Natalie said, trying to be practical even as hope fluttered in her chest. "I work for him. It would be inappropriate." "Who says so? You are both adults, both unmarried. I do not see any impediment. The difference in our positions for one thing. He owns this ranch and I am his employee. People would talk." "People always talk," Mrs. Chen said dismissively. "The question is whether you care what they say. Mr. Wade certainly does not. He does what he thinks is right, regardless of what others might think." Natalie wanted to believe it could be that simple, but she had been disappointed too many times in her life to trust in easy answers. Still, the seed of hope Mrs. Chen had planted began to grow. The following Sunday, after the big midday meal and after all the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Wade found Natalie in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up and her hair slightly mussed from the heat of cooking. "Need any help?" he asked. Natalie looked up, surprised. "I can manage, but thank you for offering." "Mrs. Chen tells me you have been doing the majority of the cooking lately," Wade said, picking up a dish towel and beginning to dry the plates Natalie had washed. "The men have certainly noticed." "I have heard nothing but compliments about the food." "Mrs. Chen is a wonderful teacher," Natalie said, "and I enjoy cooking. It is satisfying to make something that brings people pleasure." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Natalie was acutely aware of Wade's presence beside her, of the brush of his arm against hers when he reached for another plate. "Natalie," Wade said suddenly, setting down the plate he was drying. "There is something I need to say to you, and I am not sure how to begin." Natalie's heart began to pound. She set down the pot she was scrubbing and turned to face him, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Wade ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "When I first brought you here, it was because you needed help and I was in a position to provide it. It seemed like the right thing to do, the decent thing. I did not expect anything beyond that." "I know," Natalie said softly. "You have been nothing but kind and honorable. But over these past months something has changed. At least it has changed for me." Wade met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I have come to care for you, Natalie. More than an employer should care for an employee. More than a friend cares for a friend. And I need to know if there is any chance that you might feel the same way." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I do feel the same way," she said. "I have tried to be sensible and practical, but I cannot help it. You are the most remarkable man I have ever known, Wade. You saved my life and then gave me a reason to live it. How could I not fall in love with you?" The last words had slipped out before she could stop them, and she gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. But Wade was smiling now, a brilliant, joyful smile that transformed his entire face. "You love me?" he asked, stepping closer. "Yes," Natalie whispered. "I love you." Wade reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "I love you too, Natalie Harper. I think I have loved you since that first night when you were so determined to maintain your dignity despite everything you had been through. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met." He leaned down and kissed her, and it was everything Natalie had dreamed it might be. His lips were warm and gentle, the kiss tender and full of promise. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, both were flushed and smiling. "I want to court you properly," Wade said. "I want to do this right. I want everyone to know that you are my girl, that my intentions are honorable and serious." "Everyone already knows," Natalie said with a laugh. "Mrs. Chen told me this afternoon that it was obvious to anyone with eyes." Wade laughed too. "Well, Mrs. Chen is usually right about these things. But still, I want to do it properly. Will you allow me to court you, Natalie?" "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and Natalie marveled at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been alone and desperate, expecting nothing from life but more hardship. And now she was here, in the arms of a man she loved, surrounded by kindness and comfort and the promise of a beautiful future. Over the following months, Wade courted Natalie with all the attention and devotion she could have wished for. They took walks together in the evenings, strolling through the ranch property and talking about everything and nothing. Wade brought her small gifts from his trips to town: a book of poetry, a pretty hair comb, a packet of seeds for the spring garden. He held her hand when they sat together on the porch after dinner, and he kissed her good night with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Mrs. Chen watched their courtship with satisfaction, often shooing them out of the house so they could have some privacy. The ranch hands also approved, happy to see their boss so clearly content. There was much good-natured teasing, which Wade bore with patience and humor. In November, Wade asked Natalie to marry him. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, wrapped in blankets against the growing cold when he produced a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing I have left of hers. I would be honored if you would wear it, if you would agree to be my wife." Natalie's answer was to kiss him with all the love in her heart. "Yes," she said when they finally broke apart. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in Amarillo on a crisp December morning in a small church with Mrs. Chen and a few of the ranch hands as witnesses. Natalie wore a new dress in pale blue, sewn from fabric Wade had purchased specially for the occasion, and she carried a bouquet of winter roses that Mrs. Chen had somehow procured. Wade wore his best suit and could not stop smiling the entire ceremony. After the wedding, they returned to the ranch for a celebration dinner. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself, preparing a feast that rivaled the Sunday dinners. The ranch hands toasted the happy couple repeatedly, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. When the guests had finally dispersed and the house was quiet, Wade carried Natalie up the stairs to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. He set her down gently and looked at her with such love that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Natalie replied. "When I came to Amarillo all those months ago, I expected nothing. I had no hope, no prospects, no future. And then you appeared and gave me everything. A home, a purpose, and most importantly, love. How did I get so lucky?" "I am the lucky one," Wade said, pulling her close. "You brought light and joy into my life. This house was just a building before you came. Now it is a home. You made it that." He kissed her then, and Natalie surrendered to the warmth and safety of his embrace, knowing that she had finally found where she belonged. The first year of their marriage was filled with adjustments and growth. Natalie settled into her role as Wade's wife and mistress of the household, managing the domestic sphere while Wade focused on the ranch operations. Mrs. Chen remained as housekeeper, and she and Natalie worked together seamlessly, their friendship deepening with each passing month. In the spring, Natalie discovered she was expecting their first child. Wade was overjoyed at the news, becoming even more attentive and protective than he had been before. He insisted she rest more and work less, though Natalie insisted she was perfectly capable of maintaining her normal routine. "I am pregnant, not sick," she told him with fond exasperation. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still managing their households." But she secretly loved his concern, loved the way he would place his hand on her still flat stomach and speak to the baby growing inside, telling it stories about the ranch and the life they would have together. Their son was born in October of 1883, a healthy baby boy with dark hair like his father and green eyes like his mother. They named him Thomas, after Wade's father, and he became the center of their world. Wade was a devoted father, rising in the night to help with feedings and changings, rocking the baby when he fussed, and staring at him for hours as though he could not quite believe this perfect little person was his. Natalie watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. She had known Wade was kind and good, but seeing him as a father revealed new depths to his character. He was gentle and patient, singing lullabies in his rough cowboy voice and making silly faces to earn Thomas's smile. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Elizabeth after Natalie's mother. She was a sweet-tempered baby with blonde curls and Wade's brown eyes, and Thomas took his role as big brother very seriously, always wanting to help care for his baby sister. The ranch prospered under Wade's management. The expanded herd yielded good profits, and Wade was able to make improvements to the property, adding new buildings and equipment. He hired additional ranch hands to help with the growing operation, and Natalie often found herself cooking for 8 or 10 men at mealtimes. Despite the hard work and long hours, Natalie was deeply happy. She loved the rhythm of ranch life, the changing seasons, the satisfaction of seeing things grow and thrive under her care. She loved watching her children play in the yard, loved the feel of Wade's arms around her at night, loved the sense of purpose and belonging that filled her days. One evening, when Thomas was 4 and Elizabeth was 2, Natalie and Wade sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. It had become their habit to spend a few quiet moments together at the end of each day, talking about the events and plans for tomorrow. "You ever think about how different your life might have been?" Wade asked, taking her hand in his. "If you had never come to Amarillo, or if we had never met?" Natalie shuddered. "I try not to. That was the darkest period of my life, those weeks when I first arrived. I was so close to giving up entirely." "I am glad you did not," Wade said softly. "I am glad you held on long enough for our paths to cross. So am I. Though sometimes I still cannot quite believe all this is real, that I have you and the children and this beautiful life we have built together. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Wade said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "And it is only going to get better. I promise you that." And he kept that promise. Over the years that followed, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Wade became one of the most respected ranchers in the area, known for his fair dealing and quality livestock. Natalie became equally respected in her own right, known for her kindness and her skill at managing a household and raising children. They had 2 more children, another son named David and a daughter named Mary, rounding out their family to 4. The house that had once felt too large and empty for just Wade and Mrs. Chen was now filled with the noise and chaos and joy of a young family. Mrs. Chen remained with them as the children grew, transitioning from housekeeper to beloved grandmother figure. She taught the children to cook and garden, told them stories of her own childhood in China, and provided Natalie with advice and companionship through all the challenges of motherhood. The children grew up happy and healthy, riding horses almost before they could walk and helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able. Thomas showed a natural aptitude for working cattle and declared his intention to take over the ranch someday. Elizabeth was quieter and more studious, preferring books to barnyard work. David was adventurous and fearless, always getting into mischief. And Mary, the baby, was sweet and affectionate, always wanting to help her mother in the kitchen. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade took Natalie back to Amarillo for a special dinner at the same restaurant where he had bought her that first meal. They sat at a table by the window, older now and surrounded by the responsibilities of family and ranch, but still deeply in love. 10 years, Wade said, raising his glass in a toast. 10 years since I met the woman who would change my life. You changed my life, Natalie corrected. I was the one who was starving and desperate, remember? You were never desperate, Wade said. Not in your heart. You were down on your luck, certainly, but you never lost your dignity or your strength. That is what drew me to you from the beginning. I was terrified, Natalie admitted. When you offered to help that first night, I kept waiting for you to demand something in return. I had learned to expect the worst from people. And instead you got the best, Wade said with a grin. Natalie laughed and threw her napkin at him. Your humility is overwhelming. I am just stating facts, Wade said, catching the napkin and setting it aside. But in all seriousness, Natalie, these past 10 years have been the best of my life. You and the children are everything to me. I thank God every day for bringing you into my life. I thank God for you too, Natalie said, her eyes bright with tears. You gave me everything when I had nothing. Hope when I was in despair. Love when I thought I would always be alone. I will never be able to repay that debt. There is no debt, Wade said firmly. What we have is not about owing or repaying. It is about love, pure and simple. And I will love you until my dying day, Natalie Lawson. As they finished their meal and walked back through the streets of Amarillo, Natalie thought about that frightened, desperate girl who had stood outside this very restaurant all those years ago, too hungry and proud to beg. If she could go back and speak to her younger self, she would tell her to hold on just a little longer. She would tell her that help was coming, that a generous cowboy would soon appear and change everything. She would tell her that expecting nothing was fine because everything was on its way. The years continued to pass, marked by births and deaths, triumphs and setbacks, but always anchored by the deep love between Wade and Natalie. They weathered droughts that threatened the cattle, harsh winters that tested their endurance, and the usual trials that come with raising a family and running a business. Through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense of the word. Wade consulted Natalie on all major decisions regarding the ranch, valuing her sharp mind and practical wisdom. Natalie, in turn, relied on Wade's steady strength and unwavering support as she navigated the challenges of motherhood and household management. Their children grew and thrived, each developing their own distinct personality and pursuing their own dreams. Thomas did indeed take over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch as he grew older, showing a natural gift for the work. Elizabeth attended a teaching college and returned to open a school in Amarillo, where she taught children from the surrounding ranches. David, true to his adventurous nature, joined the Texas Rangers and spent his years protecting frontier settlements. Mary married a neighboring rancher's son and settled nearby, close enough to visit regularly with her own growing family. Mrs. Chen lived to see all the children grown and married, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Her loss was deeply felt by the entire family, and they buried her in the small cemetery on the ranch property, marking her grave with a beautiful stone that read, "Beloved friend and grandmother, may she rest in peace." Wade and Natalie grew old together, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. Wade's dark hair turned gray, then white, and his face became weathered and lined from decades of outdoor work. Natalie's figure softened and her own hair silvered, but to Wade, she was as beautiful at 60 as she had been at 22. They continued to sit on the porch most evenings, though they now needed blankets even in summer as the cold bothered their aging bones. They would watch the sunset and talk about the day, about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch and its future. "We have had a good life," Wade said one evening when he was 70 and Natalie was 66. "A very good life." "The best," Natalie agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I would not change a single thing." "Not even those first terrible weeks in Amarillo?" Wade asked. Natalie considered. "Not even those. They were awful, certainly, but they led me to you, and that makes them worthwhile." "You know what I remember most about that first night?" Wade asked. "When I brought you to the doctor and then to dinner." "What?" "The way you tried so hard to maintain your dignity even though you were clearly terrified and in pain. You sat up straight and spoke politely and did not complain, even though I could see you were at the end of your rope. That is when I knew you were special. That is when I started falling in love with you, though I did not recognize it at the time. I thought you were too good to be true, Natalie admitted. A handsome stranger who rescued me from thugs, paid my medical bills, bought me dinner, and offered me a job. It seemed impossible. And yet here we are, nearly 40 years later. Here we are, Natalie echoed contentedly. Wade passed away in his sleep at the age of 74, peacefully and without pain. Natalie woke one morning to find him still and cold beside her, and though her heart broke with grief, she was grateful that he had gone so gently. He was buried in the family cemetery beside Mrs. Chen, and the entire community turned out for his funeral, testament to the respect and affection he had earned over his lifetime. Natalie lived another 5 years after Wade's death, cared for by her children and grandchildren, who took turns staying with her at the ranch house. She spent her days tending a small garden, reading and writing letters to her scattered family. She also began writing down the story of her life, starting with those desperate weeks in Amarillo, and ending with Wade's death, wanting future generations to know the remarkable man their ancestor had been. On a warm spring morning, just a few months after her 71st birthday, Natalie passed away peacefully in the same bed where Wade had died. Her children found her with a smile on her face, and in her hand was a worn photograph of Wade taken on their wedding day, his eyes crinkled with joy. They buried her beside her beloved husband, and the grandchildren placed wildflowers on both graves. The headstone they erected read, Natalie Harper Lawson, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She expected nothing and received everything. The ranch continued to operate for many more years under Thomas's management, and later his sons. It became a prosperous operation known throughout Texas, and the family that worked it remained proud of the legacy Wade and Natalie had built together. The story of how Wade and Natalie met became family legend, passed down from generation to generation. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit around dinner tables and hear about the generous cowboy who rescued a desperate young woman and loved her for the rest of his life. They heard about the hard work and dedication that built the ranch, about the values of kindness and integrity that Wade and Natalie had instilled in their children. And though Wade and Natalie were gone, their love story lived on, a testament to the power of generosity, the strength of true love, and the beautiful life that can grow from the darkest of beginnings. Natalie Harper had arrived in Amarillo expecting nothing, and through the kindness of one good man, she had received everything: love, family, home, and a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. The ranch house still stood decades later, weathered but strong, a monument to what two people could build together when they combined hard work with deep love. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Texas plains, some said you could almost hear the echo of laughter from the porch, the sound of Wade and Natalie enjoying one more sunset together, forever, bound by a love that had transcended every obstacle and endured beyond death itself.